If you've ever read a no-sleep story, you know exactly what you're about to get into. No-sleep stories specialize in a unique brand of horror. The type of horror stories that are submitted by real people who want their stories told. The following events will torment you in your insomnia-addled midnight hours. If you don't like being scared, you may want to click away now, because these stories are going to hit a little too close to home. Here are 10 no-sleep stories to chill your bones. Number 10 is That Wasn't My Husband I Slept Next to Last Night. This story follows a man named Peter who suspects that his husband isn't who he thinks he is. His husband Christopher had been on a business trip, taking his suitcase with him. Though Christopher returned with his suitcase a few days later, Peter began to feel uncomfortable around him. There was something just off about him. Though he looked exactly like the man that Peter had married, he didn't act like it. Worse still, when Christopher went back to work the next day, Peter thought about things. Things like Christopher's body had felt strange lying next to him, how he seemed sweatier than usual, but most worrying of all, that there was something which stank like a dead body locked inside the suitcase that Christopher had taken on his trip. Before this user could have a follow-up to this story, he mysteriously disappeared. Number 9 is the search and rescue officer. Some accounts posted to NoSleep involve strange professional experiences. Police officers entering haunted houses, social workers encountering a stalker. But one of the most chilling encounters was described in a series of posts made by a search and rescue officer for the US Forest Service. One encounter involved finding an adult woman who had disappeared out in the woods. He found her naked and curled up under a rotting log. She was terrified, but the officers successfully persuaded her to follow him back to his camp. However, on the way, the woman began shouting at the trail behind them, telling something unseen to leave her alone. The officer would have thought that she was hallucinating if it wasn't for the strange insect-like sounds he heard coming from that direction. To this day, the woman remains unable to fully explain what happened to her. Number 8 is Return to Sender. Return to Sender tells the strange account of Manny and Justin. Both of these men were neighbors. Justin was trying to become a YouTube celebrity making videos every day. Manny would see him trying various things, camera in hand out on their street. However, his antics eventually became annoying. One day, Justin was going on a trip and asked Manny if he would check his mail for him. Days later, Manny saw a big box had been delivered to Justin's house. It was marked Return to Sender. It was heavy, and as Manny tried to lift up the box, he dropped it. Eventually, he stored it in the garbage. Days passed, and the box began to smell, so Manny opened it up to see what was inside. Justin had posted himself cross-country as a gag, vlogging from inside the box. Up until Manny dropped the box, that is, breaking Justin's neck and killing him instantly. Number 7 is the 911 operator. Some of the most frightening no-sleep stories revolve around phone calls, and the most terrifying of them all was received by a 911 operator. It was late at night and the caller was more puzzled than upset. He was asking for the police because a man was standing on his lawn. At first, the man was stumbling around in circles, but then the caller described how the man began smiling and laughing, as well as doing a handstand of all things on the lawn. Eventually, the call turned from bewilderment to terror, as the caller described how the man in his yard had large teeth and dark eyes. That is when the call went dead. When the officer did reach the home, he found footprints leading from an old quarry to the victim's backyard. The man was never found, as if something had clawed its way out of the quarry and then dragged the collar into its depths. Number 6 is a story to scare my son. A man was sitting with his young son, William, who was playing Minecraft. William's father was concerned about William being preyed upon by sick adults playing the game, so he tells William a cautionary tale. He tells William about a young boy named Colby, who frequented an older game years previous. Colby made a new friend in the game world. The friend told Colby that he had a present for him, so Colby gave him his home address. However, one night he awoke to find that both his parents had been murdered. The killer appeared, killed Colby, and then heard a noise coming from another room. It was a small baby. The killer took the baby home and raised it as his own. When the father finished the story, William was certainly afraid of people online, especially considering that the killer named the baby that he stole William. Number 5 is room 733. The No Sleep subreddit often explores the darker side of life, and no more so than the post known as room 733. In it, a freshman finds herself living in dorm room 734 on campus. The building had a history of its own, and she soon learned that the room next door, 733, had another name, the suicide room. Several people had jumped from the window and others had hanged themselves, and that was just in the previous couple years. For that reason, no one was allowed to stay in it any longer. Anyone who visited the room claimed that there was something living in the closet of 733. After investigating the room further, one of the freshman's friends found her way into the room and leapt to her death. The freshman turned to see a shadowy face peering out of the closet and then fled the room, running for her life. Number 4 is Boreaska. When Sam Walker moved to a small town as a kid, he soon befriended the local children and attended school like anyone else. In the surrounding countryside, Sam was led by his friends to an old treehouse. The other kids told him that everyone had to carve their name on the tree. If he didn't, he'd disappear. Not long after, Sam's sister, who hadn't written her name in the tree, vanished without a trace. 5 years later, other children began disappearing. Sam and his friends took it upon themselves to discover where his sister and the other kids had gone. They began to notice that there was a strange sound coming from the town, almost like a metal grinding. Connecting the sound to the disappearances, Sam and his friends soon realized that the townsfolk themselves were involved. Disturbingly, it was discovered that the grinding was the disposing of all of the bodies. Number 3 is the dead girlfriend. Your partner is gone, and now you have to face the world, which now seems a much bleaker place. Many in this situation have sought out religious teachings to help them in their grief. However, others have reached out to mediums in order to contact their dead loved ones. In this no sleep story, however, there's no need for the writer to use a medium. His dead girlfriend started messaging him after her death. Though her Facebook profile had been inactive since her passing, nonetheless, the dead girlfriend was able to communicate with her boyfriend through it. The creepiest part of the story is that the writer was then sent a picture via Facebook Messenger from his deceased partner. The photograph was taken outside of his house that very night. After this story was posted, there was no hearing back from that man. Number 2 is the story of her holding an orange. When Milos Bogatic wrote the story of her holding an orange, he brought his real-life experiences as an immigrant from Eastern Europe moving to the United States. The problem was that when he moved across the Atlantic Ocean to his new home, something followed him from the old country. As a child growing up, a mysterious woman would appear at his window. However, she didn't threaten him. She didn't try to kill him. All she ever did was hold out an orange in her hand, as if to ask him to take it. Seemingly comical at first, with each visitation, the experience became more and more nightmarish. He was left to ask why the woman wouldn't leave him alone, and what would happen if he took the fruit. The ending is so terrifying that perhaps it's easier if you Google the story yourself. The ending is one that you will not believe. And number 1 is Penpal. The NoSleep subreddit boasts over 12.5 million subscribers, but much of this success can be traced back to a single series. It wasn't the first story on the subreddit, but it did change everything. The story is called Penpal. It follows the writer Dathan Auerbach as a young boy. After tying a letter to a helium balloon hoping that someone would find it and write to him, he was terrified when he discovered photographs of him and his mother sent to their house. After that, throughout his childhood, strange things continued to happen. A strange scratching sound could be heard from the crawl space under his home. And most terrifying of all, he went to sleep one night in the safety of his own bed, only to wake in a nearby forest without any dirt on his bare feet. Someone had broken into his home and carried him out there into the dark.